The autumn wind whistled through the Montana pines, carrying the scent of wood smoke and approaching winter. Hank Brody tracked a set of deer prints in the early morning frost, his boots crunching softly against fallen leaves. His dog Rex, a battle-scarred German shepherd, padded silently beside him, nose twitching at the wind. "What do you think, boy?" Hank whispered, crouching to examine a fresh print. "Couple hours old?" Rex's ears perked forward, but he remained silent, exactly what Hank had trained him for. Good hunting dogs didn't bark. They pointed. The familiar weight of his Remington pressed against his shoulder as he navigated through the dense undergrowth. Out here, miles from his cabin, and even further from the nearest town, Hank found the quiet he craved. No screeching tires, no unexpected explosions, no memories of Baghdad that made his hands shake on bad nights. His radio crackled, shattering the morning silence. "Hank? You out there, son?" Hank sighed, reaching for the device clipped to his belt. Old Jim never could leave him alone for long. "Copy that, Jim. What's the emergency?" "No emergency. Just checking if you're coming by the shop today. Got a '67 Mustang needs looking at. Little busy right now." Hank kept his voice low, watching a cluster of birds take flight from a nearby tree. "Tracking something. Always tracking something, aren't you? Listen, son, you can't hide in those woods forever. Town's having a—" Hank clicked the radio off. Whatever gathering the town had planned, he wasn't interested. He'd had enough of crowds in the Corps. Rex suddenly froze, hackles rising. Hank immediately dropped into a crouch, eyes scanning the tree line. Something moved between the trunks. Something big. Too fluid for a deer, too tall for a wolf. The flask of whiskey in his jacket pocket suddenly felt heavier. He'd taken a few pulls earlier to ward off the morning chill, and now the edges of his vision swam slightly as he tried to focus on the movement. A flash of blue between the trees. Not the dull blue of denim or hunting gear. This was electric, alien. It moved with an unnatural grace, weaving between trunks with impossible flexibility. "What the hell?" Hank muttered, raising his rifle. Through the scope, he caught another glimpse. Long limbs, gleaming skin. Definitely not human. His military training kicked in, overlaying memories of threats that needed to be eliminated. Rex growled low in his throat. The creature stepped into a shaft of morning light, and Hank's finger tightened on the trigger. In the split second before he squeezed, his alcohol-addled brain registered something about the shape that didn't compute. But by then, the shot had already cracked through the forest silence. A very human scream split the air. "Shit!" Hank sprinted forward, Rex at his heels. He burst through a thicket into a small clearing and skidded to a stop, his boots sliding in the frost. A woman lay sprawled in the leaves, clutching her shoulder. But woman wasn't quite the right word. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Her hair was jet black, falling in waves around a face that was both alien and breathtakingly beautiful. She wore some kind of form-fitting suit that left little to the imagination, now torn and bloodied at the shoulder, and she was absolutely furious. "You shot me!" She pushed herself up on one elbow, her accent strange but her English perfect. "You actually shot me, you primitive ape!" Hank lowered his rifle slowly, mouth hanging open. You looked like..." "Like what?" Her eyes flashed, literally flashed, with an inner light that made his spine tingle. "A deer? A bear? Please enlighten me on what exactly justified shooting an unarmed woman in the middle of nowhere?" Rex approached her cautiously, sniffing. To Hank's surprise, she reached out with her uninjured arm and scratched behind the dog's ears. Rex's tail began wagging immediately. "Traitor," Hank muttered to his dog. He slung his rifle and stepped closer. "Look, I'm sorry. You're clearly not from around here. I thought you were some kind of predator." "Oh, that's rich." She tried to stand but winced, falling back. "The only predator I see is the drunk human with the projectile weapon." "Seriously, projectiles? How primitive is this planet?" Hank's combat medical training kicked in as he noticed the growing dark stain on her shoulder. "You're bleeding. Let me help." "Stay back." She held up her hand, and for a moment he could have sworn it glowed. "I don't need help from someone who shoots first and asks questions later. Lady, you're bleeding out in the middle of nowhere. It's below freezing and the nearest hospital is 40 miles away. Plus, I'm pretty sure showing up at the ER with blue skin might raise some questions you don't want to answer. She glared at him for a long moment, then looked at her shoulder. Damn it. Your primitive weapon actually penetrated my dermal protection. That shouldn't be possible. I'm an excellent shot. Hank couldn't help the note of pride in his voice. Is that supposed to make me feel better? But there was a hint of amusement in her tone now. She sighed, looking around the forest. Fine. You shot me. You get to fix me. But if you try anything, yeah, you'll vaporize me with your space laser, or whatever. Hank moved closer, kneeling beside her. Up close, her skin was even more fascinating. Tiny patterns seemed to shift and move beneath the surface. I'm Hank Brody, Ilani of the House of Seven Moons, third daughter of the High Counselor, keeper of the sacred. She caught his bewildered expression and rolled her eyes. Just call me Ilani. How about Ellie? The look she gave him could have melted steel. No. Hank examined her shoulder carefully. The bullet had gone clean through, missing anything vital. Good news is, it's a through and through. Bad news is, you've lost a lot of blood, or whatever that purple stuff is. It's blood. We're not that different, anatomically speaking. She watched him tear a strip from his shirt, though clearly we're centuries ahead in terms of evolution and civilization. Says the alien who got shot by a primitive ape. Hank began bandaging her shoulder. What are you doing out here anyway? Montana's a long way from the Seven Moons. Ilani tensed. That's none of your concern. Lady, I just committed what's probably an interplanetary incident by shooting you. I think I deserve to know why there's an alien princess wandering around my hunting grounds. First, I'm not a princess. Second, ... She glanced nervously at the sky. Let's just say I'm taking an extended vacation from some very persistent individuals who want to discuss certain sensitive information I may have acquired. You're on the run. Hank tied off the bandage. Great, just great. I finally meet an alien, and she's a fugitive. I prefer political dissident. She tried to stand again and wobbled. Hank caught her arm, noting how warm her skin felt despite the cold. My ship crashed about 10 kilometers from here. I was looking for components to repair my emergency beacon when you so graciously introduced yourself via ballistic trauma. Rex suddenly growled, his ears flat against his head. Hank felt it too. A change in the air pressure, a subtle vibration in the ground. Ilani's face went pale, making her skin almost lavender. They found me. We need to move. Now. Who found you? A sound like thunder rolled across the sky, but when Hank looked up, there wasn't a cloud in sight. Something massive passed overhead, hidden by some kind of cloaking technology that bent the light around it. The people who want me dead. Ilani grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Either help me hide or leave me here, but decide quickly, because in about 3 minutes, this entire forest is going to become a war zone. Hank looked at his dog, then at the alien woman bleeding purple blood all over his favorite hunting jacket, then at the distortion in the sky that was definitely getting larger. My cabin's about 2 miles east, he said finally. Can you run? Better than you, even with a hole in my shoulder. She smiled for the first time, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be human. Try to keep up, primitive. They ran. Rex led the way, picking the clearest path through the underbrush. Despite her injury, Ilani moved with incredible grace, barely seeming to touch the ground. Hank followed, his military training kicking in as he scanned for pursuit. The thunder grew louder. Beams of energy began slicing through the trees behind them, turning wood to ash instantly. Friends of yours? Hank ducked under a falling branch. Bounty hunters. Ilani vaulted over a fallen log. The best in 3 systems. You might want to run faster. This is my fastest. Primitives, she muttered, but grabbed his hand. Suddenly, Hank felt lighter, as if gravity had lessened its hold. His strides lengthened, matching her pace. What did you do? Localized gravitational manipulation. A child's trick. She winced as another explosion rocked the forest. Though maintaining it with a shoulder wound is less than ideal, they burst out of the trees into a small clearing. Hank's cabin sat at the far end. a two-story structure of logs and stone he'd built mostly himself. Solar panels covered the south-facing roof, and a workshop filled with half-repaired vehicles sat to one side. "Home sweet home!" Hank gasped as they reached the porch. He fumbled with his keys. "Charming." Alani leaned against the wall, her breathing ragged. The bandage on her shoulder was soaked through. "Very rustic, very primitive. You know, for someone who just got shot, you're awfully judgmental." He got the door open and ushered her inside. Rex bounded in after them, immediately taking up a guard position by the window. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A living room with a massive stone fireplace, a kitchen with modern appliances, and a stairs leading to the bedrooms above. Gun racks lined one wall, holding everything from hunting rifles to what looked suspiciously like military-grade hardware. Alani took it all in with a raised eyebrow. Preparing for war? Always. Hank moved to the window, peering out. The thundering had stopped, but he could feel eyes on the cabin. "So want to tell me what's in that sensitive information that's worth sending bounty hunters across the galaxy?" She slumped onto his couch, her shimming skin notably duller than before. "Evidence of corruption that goes to the highest levels of the Galactic Council. Proof that certain members have been selling advanced weapons to pre-contact civilizations, which is extremely illegal, by the way." "Pre-contact? You mean planets that don't know about aliens yet? Like Earth?" "Exactly." She looked at him seriously. "Your world isn't ready for our technology. The Council has strict rules about technological advancement and cultural development, but some see profit in accelerating things. Unnaturally. And you, what, discovered their secret files?" "I may have borrowed some rather incriminating data crystals from my father's private vault." She touched her shoulder, wincing. "I don't suppose you have any medical supplies that aren't completely archaic?" Hank moved to a cabinet and pulled out a comprehensive first aid kit. "Marine Corps field medicine might be primitive, but it works. Let me take a look at that wound again." As he cleaned and rebandaged her shoulder, using actual medical supplies this time, he could feel tension radiating from her. Not just from pain. She was scanning the windows, the doors, looking for escape routes. "They won't attack immediately," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "They'll wait for dark. Less chances of witnesses." "Great." Hank finished with the bandage. "So we have about 8 hours to figure out how to fight off advanced alien bounty hunters with hunting rifles and my old service weapons. Any suggestions?" "We could try not dying." She caught his eye and actually smiled. A real smile this time, not sarcastic or mocking. "Thank you, by the way, for helping me, even if you did shoot me first." "Yeah, about that. I really am sorry." "I know." She reached up and touched his hand where it rested on her shoulder. Her skin was like silk, but with a subtle electric charge that made his fingers tingle. "I can sense your emotions. You're not a bad person, Hank Brody. Just a terrible shot." "Hey, I hit exactly what I was aiming at." "Yes, and aren't you lucky it was me and not actually a deer?" She stood carefully, testing her shoulder. "Now, about those weapons of yours. They may be primitive, but they managed to hurt me. With some modifications, we might be able to make them effective against my pursuers." "Modifications? What kind of modifications?" She moved to his gun rack, examining each weapon with a critical eye. "Do you have any radioactive materials? Plutonium, perhaps? Or at least some enriched uranium?" Hank stared at her. "Lady, this is Montana, not a nuclear facility." "Pity." She picked up his AR-15, turning it over in her hands. "We'll have to work with what we have. But first," she swayed slightly, catching herself on the wall. "First, I need to rest. Healing takes energy, and I've lost a lot of blood. Use my bed upstairs. I'll keep watch down here with Rex." She started up the stairs, then paused. "Hank, if I don't survive this, you'll survive." "If I don't," she insisted, "there's a data crystal in a compartment in my suit. It contains everything. All the evidence, all the names. Make sure it gets to the right people." "How will I know who the right people are?" She smiled that sharp-toothed smile again. "Oh, you'll know. They'll be the ones with blue skin." She disappeared upstairs before he could respond. Hank sat in his favorite chair, rifle across his lap, and tried to process the last few hours. He'd shot an alien princess, who wasn't actually a princess, gotten involved in what seemed to be an intergalactic conspiracy, and was now preparing to defend his cabin against advanced bounty hunters. Rex patted over and put his head on Hank's knee. "I know, boy." Hank scratched behind his ears. "I should have stayed in bed this morning." Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, and somewhere up there, invisible ships waited for darkness to fall. The sun had dipped below the horizon when Hank heard footsteps on his stairs. Alani descended wearing one of his old Marine Corps t-shirts, the fabric hanging loose on her frame, but somehow still managing to look maddeningly attractive. "Your clothing is inefficient," she announced, reaching the bottom step, "but surprisingly comfortable." Hank kept his eyes firmly on her face, not on how the shirt fell to mid-thigh. "Glad you're making yourself at home. Feel better?" "Much." She stretched, and Hank immediately regretted letting her borrow his shirt. "Your primitive medical techniques were adequate, though on my world we'd have healed this in minutes." "Yeah? Well, on my world we say thank you when someone patches us up." She tilted her head, studying him with those unnaturally bright eyes. "Your species relies heavily on verbal gratitude rituals. Fascinating. It's called being polite." Hank stood, checking the windows for the 100th time. "And speaking of my species' strange habits, we also usually wear pants." "Are you uncomfortable with my current state of dress?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Your elevated heart rate suggests otherwise." "You can sense that?" "Among other things." She moved closer, and he caught a scent like summer lightning. "Your species broadcasts emotions quite loudly, especially attraction." Hank backed up a step, bumping into his gun rack. "Look, lady. Alani." "Right. Alani. In case you forgot, there are probably killer aliens waiting to murder us both. Maybe we should focus on that instead of whatever this is." She shrugged, the movement making the shirt slip off one blue shoulder. "Multitasking is another of my species' talents." Before Hank could respond, Rex's head snapped up, ears forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Company?" Hank grabbed his rifle. Alani closed her eyes, concentrating. "No, different. You're law enforcement, I think. One vehicle, two humans." Headlights swept across the cabin windows as a police cruiser pulled up outside. Hank cursed under his breath. "Sheriff Thompson. Perfect timing." He turned to Alani. "Upstairs. Now." "But unless you want to explain to the local police why you're blue, move." She darted upstairs just as someone knocked on the door. Hank took a deep breath, then opened it to find Sheriff Thompson and his deputy standing on the porch. "Evening, Hank." The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s, tipped his hat. "Mind if we come in?" "Actually, I was just heading to bed. Won't take long." Thompson stepped past him into the cabin, his deputy following. "Got some strange reports we need to discuss." Hank closed the door, mentally calculating how long it would take to reach the shotgun by the fireplace. "Oh?" "Multiple witnesses reported gunshots and strange lights in these woods earlier today." Thompson's eyes scanned the cabin. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Just doing some hunting. Had to chase off a mountain lion." "With energy weapons?" Hank kept his face neutral. "What?" "Mrs. Peterson swears she saw, and I quote, laser beams shooting through the trees." The sheriff's hand rested on his holster. "And now we've got government types asking questions. FBI, maybe CIA. They're very interested in this area suddenly." A thump sounded from upstairs. Everyone looked up. "What was that?" the deputy asked. "Raccoons," Hank said quickly. "In the attic. Been meaning to set traps." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Must be some big raccoons. Making all sorts of noise earlier. Sounded almost like a woman's voice." Another thump, followed by what was definitely a feminine curse in an alien language. "Hank," Thompson sighed, "you know I respect your privacy. Hell, after what you did for this country, you deserve it. But if you're mixed up in something illegal..." "It's not what you think." Hank ran a hand through his hair, trying to think fast. I met someone. She's shy. Doesn't like people knowing she's here." The sheriff's face broke into a grin. "Well, why didn't you say so?" About time you stopped being a hermit. He turned to the stairs and called up, "Ma'am, no need to hide. We're just doing our jobs." Hank's heart stopped as footsteps descended the stairs. But when Alani appeared, her skin was a perfectly normal human tone. She'd found a pair of his sweatpants, too. "I'm so embarrassed," she said, her accent now pure Montana. "I didn't want anyone to know I was staying here. Small-town gossip and all that." Thompson's grin widened. "No shame in it, miss. Though you might want to tell your boyfriend here to be more careful with his hunting. Those shots caused quite a stir." "He's very protective," Alani said, sliding an arm around Hank's waist. He forced himself not to jump at her touch, especially of his privacy. "Well, we won't keep you folks." Thompson headed for the door, then paused. "Just be careful out there. Strange things happening lately, and those government boys don't look like they're here for the fishing." After they left, Hank waited until the cruiser's taillights disappeared before rounding on Alani. "How did you do that?" "Your skin. Photonic manipulation." Her skin rippled, returning to its natural blue. "A basic camouflage technique, though maintaining it is exhausting." "That's actually pretty impressive." "Your surprise at my capabilities is starting to get offensive." But she smiled as she said it. "Now, about these government agents. If they're already here, we need to move faster than I thought." She went to the kitchen table where she'd laid out pieces of what looked like a small metal sphere. "I need to repair my emergency beacon. With any luck, I can contact allies before those bounty hunters decide to attack." "And these allies are friendly?" "Relatively." She began connecting wires with precise movements. "They're rebels like me, fighting against corruption in the council. They have a ship that could get me off your planet before things get worse." Hank tried to ignore the odd pang in his chest at the thought of her leaving. "Right, good plan. Get you home safe." She glanced up at him. "You're disappointed." "What? No, I—" He stopped, remembering she could sense emotions. "Look, it's been an interesting day. That's all." "Indeed." She connected another wire, and the sphere hummed to life. "Though I admit, not all of it has been unpleasant, despite the shooting incident." "You're never going to let that go, are you? Would you, if our positions were reversed?" "Fair point." He watched her work for a moment. "So, these rebels, they're all like you?" "You mean blue?" "Not all. The galaxy is quite diverse." She smirked without looking up, though I sense that's not really what you're asking. "I don't know what I'm asking anymore." Hank dropped into a chair. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether I had enough firewood for winter. Now I'm harboring an alien fugitive who can change color at will and reads emotions." "Your life was simpler before me," she agreed. "Boring, but simpler." "It wasn't boring." "Please, I've been in your head. You've been hiding out here, punishing yourself for surviving when your fellow warriors didn't." Her hand stilled on the beacon. "You're not the only one who carries guilt, Hank Brody." Before he could respond, the sphere in her hands pulsed with bright light. A high-pitched whine filled the air, making Rex whimper. "No, no, no!" Alani tried to shut it down, but the beacon kept pulsing. "This isn't right. The signal's too strong." "What's happening?" "I miscalculated. Earth's magnetic field is interfering with the calibration." She looked up at him, fear clear in her glowing eyes. "They'll detect this. I just gave away our position." As if on cue, the entire cabin began to vibrate. A deep thrumming filled the air, and through the windows, Hank saw the stars disappear as something massive blocked out the sky. "Well," he said, reaching for his rifle, "I guess we're about to find out how primitive these weapons really are." The cabin shook as something massive descended from above. Hank grabbed Alani's arm and pulled her away from the windows. "Any chance those are your rebel friends?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Wrong ship design." She clutched the malfunctioning beacon to her chest. "We need to move, now." "Basement," Hank whistled for Rex. "I've got a panic room down there. Military grade." "How charmingly paranoid of you." They raced down the basement stairs just as the first explosion rocked the cabin. Hank sealed the panic room's heavy door behind them, engaging multiple locks. The room was small but well stocked. Weapons, supplies, communications equipment, A single cot occupied one corner. Alani took in the arsenal with raised eyebrows. Perhaps you're not quite as primitive as I thought. She ran a finger along a rack of grenades. Though these explosives are still sadly lacking in antimatter. Another blast shook the walls. Dust filtered down from the ceiling. They're not trying to kill us, Alani said, cocking her head. Those are warning shots. They want me alive. And the data crystal. Why? Dead whistleblowers can become martyrs. They need to discredit me first. She started pacing the small space, the borrowed t-shirt riding up as she moved. We have maybe an hour before they breach your defenses. Hank tried to focus on checking his weapons instead of the long blue legs moving past him. That beacon of yours. Can you fix it? Maybe, but I'll need... She stopped pacing. Do you have a shower down here? What? My species absorbs energy through our skin. Water conducts energy. I could recharge enough to boost the beacon's signal strength. She was already pulling the t-shirt over her head. Hank spun around quickly. Whoa, what are you doing? Your human modesty is adorable, but we don't have time for it. Where's the shower? Behind that partition, but she was already moving, dropping his sweatpants as she went. Hank kept his back turned, face burning. The sound of running water filled the small space. Your temperature is elevated again, she called out, amusement in her voice. Are all humans so easily flustered by nudity? Just the ones who were raised right. He busied himself checking ammunition. You about done in there? Almost. Though I have questions about your bathing products. Why do you humans insist on artificial scents? Your natural pheromones are much more interesting. We're not discussing my pheromones. No. Your body seems quite interested in discussing. Can we focus on the alien bounty hunters trying to kill us? Multitasking, remember? She emerged from behind the partition, wrapped in a towel, her blue skin literally glowing with absorbed energy. Water droplets traced paths down her shoulders, each one catching the light like tiny stars. Hank handed her another t-shirt without looking directly at her. Here, please put this on before I have a stroke. Your cardiovascular system is remarkably sensitive, but she took the shirt. Though I suppose I should be flattered. Not every human has the privilege of seeing one of my kind in such an intimate setting. Yeah, I'm a real lucky guy. He risked a glance and found her dressed, mostly. The shirt clung to her damp skin in ways that weren't helping his concentration. Can you fix the beacon now? She picked up the sphere, which immediately began humming in response to her energized state. Much better, though we'll need to get to higher ground for the signal to reach my allies. There's a fire tower about a mile from here. High enough? Perfect. She reached for the beacon's control panel, then hesitated. Hank, if this works, my people will come for me. They'll take me somewhere safe, somewhere the council can't reach. Good, that's good. You could come with me. He stared at her. What? Your world is about to change anyway. The council's corruption will be exposed, and Earth will learn it's not alone in the universe. She stepped closer, and that lightning scent filled his nose again. You're a warrior without a war, Hank Brody. The rebellion could use someone like you. Someone who shoots first and asks questions later? Someone who helps strangers even after they insult his entire species. Her hand touched his chest, right over his hammering heart. Someone who feels everything so strongly, but tries to hide it. Another explosion rocked the panic room. Closer this time. We don't have time for this discussion, Hank said, stepping back. We need to move. Running from your emotions. How very human. But she picked up the beacon and moved toward the door. Lead the way, primitive. They emerged from the panic room to find the basement stairs in ruins. Hank boosted Alani up to the main floor, trying very hard to ignore how smooth her skin felt under his hands. The cabin was a disaster. Holes had been blown in the roof and walls, letting in the cold night air. Through the gaps, Hank could see dark shapes moving against the stars. Ships, he realized, dozens of them. Your dog, Alani said suddenly. Where's Rex? Hank whistled softly. A whine came from under the remains of his couch, and Rex emerged, shaken but unhurt. Good boy! Hank checked him quickly for injuries. Ready for a midnight run? Rex's tail wagged once. The ships are moving to surround us, Alani warned. We need to. A beam of intense light suddenly speared down from above, cutting through what remained of the roof. Hank tackled Alani behind an overturned table as the beam swept across the room. Scanning for life signs, she whispered. They know we're still here. Back door, through the workshop. Now! They crawled through the wreckage of Hank's home, Rex slinking along beside them. Just as they reached the workshop door, a voice boomed from above, impossibly loud and speaking in a language that made Hank's teeth ache. Alani responded in the same language, her voice sharp with defiance. What did you say to them? Hank asked as they slipped into the workshop. I questioned their parentage and suggested anatomically impossible acts involving their face tentacles. She grinned at his expression. What? I contain multitudes. You're insane. You know that, right? Says the man with a basement full of weapons. They reached the workshop's rear door. Beyond it, the forest waited, dark and dense enough to provide cover, but also full of unknown threats. The fire tower's due east, Hank said, checking his rifle. Stay close to me, move quietly, and Alani kissed him. It was brief but intense, like touching a live wire. Her lips were impossibly soft, and that lightning scent filled his head until he could barely think. She pulled back, her eyes literally glowing in the darkness. For luck, she said. Also, I've been wanting to do that since you bandaged my shoulder. Even though I shot you, perhaps because you shot me. I never claimed to be entirely rational. She hefted the beacon. Now shall we run for our lives? Hank touched his lips, which were tingling like he'd licked a battery. After you, princess? Not a princess. They burst out of the workshop into the night, Rex leading the way as energy beams began slicing through the trees around them. Above, the bounty hunters' ships moved like dark stars, hunting for their prey. And somewhere in the distance, a fire tower waited. Their only chance at survival, if they could reach it before their luck ran out. The Montana forest had become a battlefield. Energy beams carved through the darkness, turning ancient pines into ash. Hank and Alani sprinted through the chaos, Rex leading the way with his unerring sense of direction. I have to say, Alani called between breaths, you Earthmen know how to show a girl an exciting time. Oh, yeah? Hank pulled her behind a tree as another blast scorched the air where they'd been. Is this better or worse than your usual dates? Well, usually they don't shoot me first. She pressed against him, her body radiating that strange alien warmth. Though I must admit, your marksmanship was impressive. Are you flirting with me while we're running for our lives? Multitasking, remember? Her eyes glowed mischievously. Besides, fear responses increase attraction. Basic biology. A massive shape dropped from the sky, landing between them and the fire tower. The bounty hunter towered over them, its armor gleaming with deadly purpose. Alani of the Seven Moons, it growled through its translator. Surrender or die. How about we discuss this over dinner instead? Hank fired 3 precise shots at the helmet seals. The hunter staggered, atmosphere hissing from its suit. Nice shot, Alani grinned. Though your dinner invitation needs work. They sprinted past the wounded hunter toward the fire tower. More ships descended from above, but the forest canopy provided cover. You know, Hank panted as they ran, when I woke up this morning, I just planned to do some hunting. And look what you caught, she winked at him, though your pickup lines need serious improvement. They reached the tower clearing. The steel structure rose into the night sky like a skeleton, its stairs zigzagging upward. If we survived this, Hank said as they started climbing, would you maybe want to get that dinner? Are you asking me out while we're being chased by bounty hunters? Is that a no? Alani laughed, a sound that made his heart skip despite the danger. Let's survive first, then we'll discuss your primitive courtship rituals. More hunters emerged from the trees. Hank counted at least 8, with more approaching. Rex, guard position! The dog took up defense as they climbed. Hank laid down covering fire, but his ammunition was running low. Halfway up, the tower groaned as hunters began climbing after them. Hank glanced down to see one using all 4 arms to scale the structure with terrifying speed. You know, he called up to Alani, most first dates don't involve quite this much cardio. If we make it, I'll make it worth your while. That promise gave him a surge of energy as they reached the observation platform. Alani immediately activated the beacon, while Hank faced the approaching hunters. The first one pulled itself up, its face a nightmare of teeth and tentacles. Hank's rifle clicked empty. Hey, ugly! He swung the weapon like a club. You're interrupting something here. More hunters reached the platform. Rex snarled and attacked while Hank drew his combat knife. He and Alani found themselves back to back, surrounded. If we survive this, Hank grunted, blocking a strike, you'll at least give me your number, right? Alani spun and kicked a hunter off the platform. Hank, if we make it out alive, I might even consider bearing your offspring. Hank nearly dropped his knife. Now that's what I call motivation. Just then, the night exploded with light as a rebel ship appeared above them. But before they could celebrate, the platform gave way. Metal screamed as the tower collapsed. Hunters fell screaming into the darkness. Hank grabbed Alani and Rex as they plummeted, but her gravitational powers slowed their fall. They landed hard but alive in the same clearing where they'd first met. Above, the rebellion ship engaged the hunters in a spectacular firefight. The last hunter dropped from the falling tower, raising its weapon. Hank met Alani's eyes, and they moved in perfect sync, him with his knife, her with a piece of debris. The hunter went down. You know, Hank said, breathing hard, I think I'm falling for you. Was that a gravity pun? Maybe. He stepped closer, drawn to her glowing eyes. But I'm serious. I know it's crazy. We just met. You're an alien fugitive, and I shot you. True. Most Earthmen just buy flowers. Alani! He took her face in his hands. I don't care if you're blue or green or purple. I don't care if half the galaxy is trying to kill you. These past 24 hours have been the most alive I've felt since coming back from the war. And maybe I'm an idiot, but... She cut him off with a kiss that literally made sparks fly, her energy field connecting with his body's electrical impulses. When they finally parted, they were both glowing slightly. You are an idiot, she said softly, but you're my idiot. The rebel ship's lights cast a soft glow over the clearing as Hank and Alani stood in each other's arms, still slightly glowing from their electrically charged kiss. So, she murmured, what happens now, Earthman? I'm thinking we board that ship, stop the corrupt council members, save the galaxy. He brushed a strand of midnight hair from her face. You know, typical third date stuff. Her laugh sent tingles down his spine, literally given her electrical nature. Third date? Was shooting me the first and running for our lives the second? Hey, you have your alien courtship rituals, we have ours. A voice boomed from the rebel ship's speakers in that strange alien language. Alani tensed. They say we need to leave now, she translated. The council will send more hunters. Hank looked at his destroyed cabin, then at Rex, who was sitting patiently beside them. I don't suppose your rebel friends are dog-friendly? Are you kidding? He took down a four-armed bounty hunter. They'll probably want to recruit him. As if understanding, Rex's tail wagged. They started toward the ship, but Alani suddenly stopped. Wait, you should know something before we go. If it's about the blue skin running in your family, I kind of figured I'm not going with them. Hank blinked. What? She took his hands, her skin warm against his. The rebellion needs the data crystal and my testimony, but after that, I want to come back here. To Earth? Why would you want to? Because here, in this backwater forest with its primitive weapons and its stubborn, handsome hunters, she smiled up at him. Here is the first place I've felt truly safe in years. Even after I shot you, especially after you shot me, because when you realized your mistake, you didn't run or try to hide it. You helped me, protected me. She traced a finger along his jaw. Fell in love with me. That obvious, huh? Your emotions broadcast very loudly. It's quite endearing. The ship's speakers blared again, more urgently this time. Go, Hank said. Do what you need to do. I'll be here when you get back. Promise? He kissed her, feeling that now familiar electrical surge. I promise. Besides, you still have my favorite shirt. 2 weeks later, Hank stood at his kitchen stove, watching with amusement as Alani attempted to make pancakes. She wore another of his shirts, this one a faded Marines tee, and absolutely nothing else. You know, he said, most people use spatulas instead of telekinesis to flip them. Most people are boring. She gestured and a pancake did a perfect aerial flip. Besides, your earth cooking implements are hopelessly primitive. Says the woman who burned water yesterday. Water should not be heated. It destroys the natural energy content. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, nuzzling her neck. And yet, here you are, making me breakfast. Yes, well, she leaned back against him. Your primitive customs are growing on me. Like these pancakes, though they'd be better with Thoraxian syrup. I don't even want to know what that is. Life had fallen into a strange but wonderful routine since her return. The cabin was rebuilt, better than before, thanks to some borrowed alien technology. The rebellion had won their first major victory against the Council, using her evidence to expose the corruption. And while there were still bounty hunters out there, Earth's very backwardness made it the perfect hiding place. Plus, as Alani liked to point out, she had her own personal bodyguard now. Speaking of primitive customs, she said, turning in his arms, you promised to teach me to shoot today. Are you sure that's a good idea, given our history? Her eyes glowed mischievously. Afraid I'll be better than you? Terrified. But at least aim away from the handsome Earthmen this time. Just one particular Earthman I'm interested in. She kissed him softly, then added, though your sheriff did look quite dashing yesterday. That's it. Hank scooped her up, making her squeal. Range time. Now before you start planning to shoot the whole town. Put me down, you primitive ape. Make me, princess. Not a princess. But she was laughing as he carried her toward the bedroom, breakfast forgotten. Rex watched them go, then helped himself to the abandoned pancakes. Later, at the makeshift shooting range behind the cabin, Hank showed her how to hold his old rifle. Remember, he said, adjusting her stance, breath control is key. Is this just an excuse to press against me? Maybe. Is it working? She turned her head to kiss him, then fired without looking. The target exploded. Show off. You love it. Yeah, he admitted, pulling her close. I really do. And as they stood there in the Montana sunshine, an ex-Marine and his alien fugitive girlfriend, Hank couldn't help but laugh at how life worked out. One mistake, one shot in the dark, had given him everything he never knew he needed. What's so funny? Alani asked. Just thinking. Maybe shooting first and asking questions later isn't always a bad policy. Oh? Planning to shoot any more alien women? Nah. He kissed her glowing skin. Got everything I need right here. Good answer, Earthman. She raised the rifle again. Now show me how to shoot like a real primitive. And as Hank taught the woman he loved how to handle Earth weapons, he knew that sometimes the best things in life come from our biggest mistakes. Sometimes you have to take a shot in the dark to find your way home. Even if that home includes a blue-skinned alien who steals your clothes, mocks your technology, and lights up your life, literally. Dear friends who joined us on this wild adventure through the Montana wilderness, who would have thought that a single misplaced shot could lead to such an extraordinary love story? Hank and Alani's tale reminds us that sometimes life's biggest mistakes can become our greatest blessings, and that love truly knows no boundaries, even interstellar ones. Their story touches on something universal, how finding the right person can change everything, even if they come in an unexpected blue package with a tendency to steal your clothes. It shows us that sometimes you have to take a risk, step out of your comfort zone, or maybe accidentally shoot an alien princess, who's definitely not a princess, to find what you're really looking for. Would you like to see more adventures of our unlikely couple? Perhaps tales of Alani trying to understand Earth customs while living in small-town Montana, Hank meeting the in-laws across several star systems, their first actual normal date if anything involving these two could ever be normal, Rex becoming a legendary figure among alien dogs, the challenges of planning an interspecies wedding, or maybe their continued battles against corrupt council members who haven't given up yet. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more of Hank, Alani, and their unique brand of romance. After all, their story might just be beginning. Remember, sometimes the best things in life come with blue skin and a questionable attitude toward Earth's primitive technology. What adventures would you like to see our star-crossed lovers tackle next?